The Apache woman bought the captive cowboy. That night she told him, "You will be my husband." James had been riding for hours through the dry, dusty canyons, his horse's hooves kicking up little clouds of sand with every step. The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting the landscape in shades of orange and gold. He had been traveling alone for days, moving from one settlement to another, hoping to find work or at least some news of his fellow cowboys. But the solitude had started to feel heavy, and every rustle in the brush made him tense. He knew the land was beautiful, but it was also dangerous, full of hidden threats he could not always see. As James rounded a bend, he thought he heard the faint sound of voices carried by the wind. He tightened his grip on the reins, scanning the rocky terrain. Shadows moved among the cliffs ahead. He spurred his horse forward, thinking he could pass without trouble, but the shadows shifted too quickly, and before he could react, a group of Apache warriors appeared, blocking the narrow trail. Horses snorted and stomped, and James realized too late that escape was impossible. "Hold it right there," one of the warriors shouted in a language James didn't understand. The men were fast and precise, circling him, making it clear that resistance would be useless. James's heart pounded in his chest, and he tightened his hands on his reins, considering his options. He had faced danger before, outlaws, storms, wild animals, but this was different. These people had him surrounded, and the tension in the air made it clear that they were not going to let him leave. Soon, another figure stepped forward, a woman mounted on a powerful horse. Her presence was commanding, and even the warriors around her seemed to defer to her judgment. James had heard stories of Apache women who were brave and strong, but nothing could have prepared him for her. She rode with a calm, almost regal air, her eyes sharp and observant. She was dressed in traditional clothing, adorned with beads and feathers, and carried herself in a way that left no doubt about her authority. This was Ayanna. She had been watching James for some time, noting his movements, the way he handled his horse, and even the wary glances he cast around the canyon. He was skilled, resourceful, and brave, all qualities she respected. But he was also alone, unprotected, and at the mercy of the tribe's rules. Ayanna knew that capturing him could be advantageous, both as a statement to the rival tribes and as someone she could decide the fate of. There was no cruelty in her eyes, only the clarity of a person used to making difficult choices. "Come down," Ayanna said in a calm but firm voice, her words clear despite the language barrier. James hesitated, trying to gauge whether she was bluffing or whether resistance would only make things worse. His pride wanted him to fight, to resist, but the logic in his mind reminded him that there was no winning this encounter. Slowly, carefully, he dismounted, keeping his hands visible and open. His heart still raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. The warriors watched silently as James was led toward the small camp nestled in the canyon's curve. The camp was simple but well organized, with tipis arranged in a semicircle and small fires burning at their centers. Smoke curled lazily into the sky, carrying with it the smell of cooking meat and warm bread. Children peeked from behind the adults, their eyes wide with curiosity, while some of the elders observed quietly, assessing the new arrival. Ayanna walked beside James, her hand lightly resting on the hilt of a knife at her belt, not threatening, but a reminder of her authority. She spoke to him occasionally, using gestures and simple words he could understand. Though he could not yet comprehend her fully, there was no malice in her tone, only a clear sense that he was now under her control. James felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He had been in tough situations before, but never had he felt so completely in someone else's power, and yet strangely, he did not feel unsafe. Once they reached the center of the camp, Ayanna turned to the gathered tribe members and gestured toward James. Her voice carried authority as she explained, through a mix of speech and gestures, that this man had been captured and was now under her care. There was a murmur among the tribe, a mixture of surprise and approval. They respected her decision, knowing she was wise and fair. James looked around, sensing the weight of the moment. He was no longer just a cowboy riding through the canyon. He was now part of something much larger, even if only temporarily. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the cliffs, James was led to a small area near one of the fires. He was offered food, which he accepted cautiously, still unsure of what his future held. Gianna observed silently from a distance, making sure he was comfortable but also aware of the rules of the camp. She did not need to speak much. Her presence alone communicated the boundaries clearly. James ate quietly, noting the simplicity and efficiency of the tribe's way of life. He had expected hostility and fear, but instead, he found a certain calm order, a rhythm that was different from anything he had known. As night fell, the camp settled into quiet activity. Fires glowed warmly, casting shadows across the faces of the tribe. The sounds of conversation and laughter drifted through the air, mingling with the distant calls of night animals. James lay near the fire, thinking about the events of the day, the woman who had captured him, and the strange turn his life had taken. He realized that the canyon, which had seemed like a place of freedom, had become a place of confinement, but not in a way that felt entirely threatening. Gianna watched him from the edge of the firelight. She studied the man who had been so defiant just hours before, noting the change in his posture, the way he observed the camp, the way he listened. She did not speak to him yet. There was no need. Actions and observations were more powerful than words. She knew that he would need time to understand the rules, the traditions, and the way of life here. But she also sensed a strength in him that could not be ignored, a strength that might one day become an ally, not a captive. Hours passed, and the night grew deeper. James finally allowed himself to relax, feeling the warmth of the fire against the cool canyon air. He thought about his life before this moment, the endless rides, the struggles, the solitude, and realized how dramatically it had changed. He had come to the canyon seeking work, adventure, and freedom, but now he was faced with a completely different challenge, surviving under the authority of a woman who clearly commanded respect and knew exactly what she wanted. Though fear still lingered, a spark of curiosity had ignited within him. Who was this woman and why had she chosen him? What was her plan, and what would his future hold under her watchful eyes? These questions filled his mind as sleep began to take him, the firelight dancing on the rocks around him. And though he did not know it yet, the night marked the beginning of a journey that would change him in ways he could never have imagined, shaping him, challenging him, and ultimately bringing him face to face with a life he had never dreamed possible. In the quiet of the night, the canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that the story of James and Ayana was only just beginning. And somewhere deep in the shadows, Ayana silently affirmed to herself that this man, wild and stubborn as he was, would play a role in her life that neither of them could yet understand. The next morning, James woke to the soft light of the sun filtering through the teepees. The air was cool and carried the scent of pine and smoke from the fires still burning low from the night before. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, stretching his stiff muscles from sleeping on the ground. Around him, the tribe was already awake, moving with purpose and efficiency. People were gathering water, tending to animals, and preparing food. There was a rhythm to their morning that James found both foreign and fascinating. Gianna appeared soon after, walking toward him with the same calm confidence that had marked her presence the day before. She carried a small bundle of food and offered it to James. "Eat," she said simply, her tone firm but not unkind. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to accept or refuse, but hunger won over pride. The food was simple but nourishing: corn bread, dried meat, and fresh water. As he ate, he watched her carefully, trying to understand the woman who now held such influence over his life. "You must learn our ways," Yana told him, speaking slowly and using gestures to help him understand. Follow, watch, do not fight unless necessary. James nodded, though he could not fully grasp the depth of what she meant. His mind was still filled with thoughts of escape, of returning to the life he had known, the life of open plains and freedom. But as he watched the tribe move with precision and care, he realized that escaping would not be simple. He would have to earn their trust first, or face the consequences. Throughout the morning, James observed the tribe as they went about their daily routines. He noticed the children learning skills from their parents, the hunters preparing for the day's hunt, and the women tending to the camp with a quiet strength that impressed him. There was no chaos here, no wasted effort, only purpose and discipline. He felt a strange mixture of admiration and envy. He had always valued independence, but now he saw that strength could also come from community and shared responsibility. Yana approached him again as the sun rose higher. "Hunt with me," she commanded, gesturing toward the pack of horses and the surrounding hills. James felt a surge of anxiety. Hunting with the Apache was not a simple task. It required skill, patience, and a deep understanding of the land. Yet he also recognized that this was an opportunity to prove himself, to show that he could be more than just a captive. He mounted his horse carefully, watching Ayanna with renewed attention. She had a quiet confidence that left no room for doubt or hesitation. They rode together in silence at first, moving through narrow passes and across rocky terrain. James tried to mimic her movements, the way she guided her horse effortlessly, scanning the landscape for signs of game. Yana's eyes were sharp, noticing every detail, the tracks of a deer, the movement of birds, the subtle changes in the wind. She pointed out each sign, using gestures and sounds that James slowly began to understand. It was exhausting, frustrating at times, but he felt a small sense of accomplishment with each successful observation. As the day progressed, they encountered a herd of deer grazing near a stream. Yana signaled for James to stay low and quiet. His heart raced as they moved closer, careful not to disturb the animals. When she finally gave him the nod, James drew his bow and took aim. The shot was not perfect, but it was enough to bring down one deer. Yana nodded approvingly, a rare smile touching her lips. "Good," she said simply, but in that single word, James felt a surge of pride he had not felt in years. The hunt continued through the afternoon, and James began to see Ayanna in a new light. She was not only strong and skilled but also patient and fair. She did not belittle him for mistakes, nor did she reward him for successes with arrogance. Her respect was measured, given where it was earned. Slowly, James began to feel a connection forming, not just as a student learning from a teacher, but as two people beginning to understand each other. By the time they returned to the camp, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon. The tribe greeted them warmly, impressed by James's contribution to the hunt. He felt a flicker of pride, realizing that he was beginning to find a place in this unfamiliar world. Yana watched quietly from the edge of the group, her expression unreadable. James wondered what she thought of him now. Did she see a stubborn, untrustworthy captive, or did she see someone who might one day become a true ally? That evening, Ayanna approached James again. "You learn fast," she said, her tone neutral but carrying a subtle hint of approval. "But mind your pride. It can be dangerous." James nodded, unsure how to respond. Pride had always been a part of who he was, driving him to survive and to succeed. Yet he realized that here, it could also be a weakness if he let it control his actions. Yana's words lingered in his mind long after she left. Over the next several days, James continued to observe and participate in the tribe's activities. He learned to gather food, maintain the horses, and understand the land in ways he had never considered. Each task was a lesson, each moment a chance to prove himself. Gianna remained close, guiding him when necessary, but allowing him space to make mistakes and learn from them. Slowly, the initial fear and resentment he had felt began to shift. He was beginning to understand the tribe's ways, and in turn, they were beginning to understand him. One afternoon, while helping with the preparation of a communal meal, James noticed how the tribe worked together seamlessly. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of unity that he had never experienced before. He realized that strength was not just about survival or skill. It was also about connection, trust, and respect. He thought about his life before this moment, the endless hours spent riding alone, and he felt a pang of loneliness that he had not admitted to himself. Here, even as a captive, he felt a sense of belonging that he had never known. Gianna observed him quietly, noting the changes in his demeanor. He was still cautious, still wary, but he was learning, adapting, and beginning to respect the ways of the tribe. She recognized that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned, and she was patient enough to allow it to grow naturally. There was a strength in James that intrigued her, a combination of stubbornness, courage, and intelligence. He was not just a man who had been captured, he was someone who could one day become her equal. As night fell, the camp settled into its usual rhythm. Fires burned brightly, children played nearby, and the adults shared stories and songs from their culture. James sat near one of the fires, watching the interactions, listening to the music, and reflecting on his experiences. He felt a strange mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. Gianna approached him once more, sitting silently beside him. Words were unnecessary. The presence alone communicated understanding, respect, and the beginnings of a bond that neither of them could yet define. For the first time since his capture, James began to feel a glimmer of hope. The world he had known was gone, replaced by one that was unfamiliar, challenging, and yet full of possibilities. He realized that his journey was no longer about escape alone. It was about learning, adapting, and perhaps discovering a part of himself he had never known existed. And as he looked at Ayana, watching the firelight dance across her face, he felt the faint stirrings of a connection that went beyond fear, beyond captivity. The night was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of the canyon and the warmth of the fires. James and Ayana remained near each other, not speaking, simply observing, reflecting, and beginning to understand. In that moment, the boundaries between captor and captive started to blur, replaced by something new, mutual respect, curiosity, and the slow emergence of trust. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time, James felt that he was not entirely alone. In the quiet of the night, under the blanket of stars, James understood that this experience was changing him in ways he could not yet comprehend. He had come to the canyon as a captive, filled with fear and uncertainty, but he would begin to leave it with knowledge, respect, and perhaps a growing sense of connection to a woman who had challenged him in ways no one else ever had. And somewhere deep within, he sensed that this was only the beginning of a story far greater than he had ever imagined. The sun had long disappeared behind the cliffs, leaving the canyon bathed in the soft, silver light of the moon. Fires flickered gently throughout the camp, casting warm glows on the faces of the tribe as they completed their evening routines. The sounds of conversation, laughter, and the distant call of night animals filled the air. James sat near one of the larger fires, his hands resting on his knees, his mind restless. The day's events, the hunt, his growing understanding of the tribe, and the small victories he had achieved played repeatedly in his thoughts. Yet there was another feeling he could not shake, one that seemed to pull at him more strongly than pride, fear, or curiosity. It was the presence of Ayana. She approached him silently, her movements fluid and confident, as if the night itself followed her lead. James looked up, feeling a sudden tension in his chest. He had grown accustomed to her guidance, to her watchful eyes, and the unspoken challenges she placed before him, but tonight felt different. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet intensity that made his pulse quicken. He noticed the way the firelight danced across her face, highlighting her sharp features and the calm strength in her eyes. For the first time, he felt truly exposed in her presence, not as a captive, but as a man under scrutiny. "James," she said softly, her voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. He straightened, trying to mask his sudden nervousness. Her tone was calm, yet it held an authority that brooked no argument. She moved closer, sitting a short distance away, her posture straight, her gaze steady. For a long moment neither spoke, the silence stretching between them like a living thing. James felt the weight of it, aware that this night was different from all the others, that something significant was about to happen. Finally, Ayanna spoke again, her voice low but firm. "You will be my husband," she said, the words clear, deliberate, and final. James felt as though the air had been knocked out of him. He blinked, unable to immediately respond. The phrase, simple yet profound, echoed in his mind, stirring a whirlwind of emotions he had not expected. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a strange spark of curiosity battled within him. He wanted to argue, to reject the notion outright, but the certainty in her eyes gave him pause. There was no cruelty, no demand for compliance, only an unshakable confidence in the statement she had made. What do you mean?" he finally stammered, his voice betraying the confusion he felt. He had heard of arranged marriages and customs of different cultures, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Ayanna's expression softened, though the firmness in her eyes remained. "In my tribe, a woman may choose a husband," she explained, her gestures deliberate to ensure he understood. "I have chosen you. You will live with me and we will share our lives. It is not punishment nor cruelty. It is a choice." James tried to collect his thoughts. He had been a cowboy, a man used to freedom, independence, and making his own decisions. The idea of being bound to someone by the will of another was almost unbearable. Yet as he looked at Ayanna, he felt something he could not quite name: admiration, respect, a strange pull toward her strength. There was honesty in her declaration, a clarity he had rarely encountered in his life. He wanted to resist, to assert his independence, but a small, unacknowledged part of him was drawn to her authority, to the certainty in her eyes. I don't know if I can," he began, only to be interrupted gently. "You do not need to answer now," she said. "Tonight is not for words. Tonight is for understanding. Watch, listen, feel. You will know more with time. You may resist, you may struggle, but this is our beginning." The calm determination in her tone left little room for argument. James realized that resistance, if attempted now, would be pointless. Yet, he also understood that this declaration was more than a command. It was an invitation to something neither of them fully understood. The night deepened around them, and James found himself watching the stars as he struggled with his emotions. Ayanna remained nearby, her presence quiet yet undeniable. He thought about the days he had spent with the tribe, the lessons he had learned, the respect he had begun to earn, the moments of connection that had surprised him. And now, this unexpected declaration threatened to overturn everything he had believed about freedom, choice, and love. The conflict within him was intense, a mixture of instinct and reason, desire and fear. Hours passed, the fire dwindling to embers, and still neither spoke. James's thoughts shifted from anger to curiosity, from confusion to a tentative understanding. He realized that Ayanna's choice was not a whim, nor an assertion of dominance. It was a recognition of his strength, his courage, and his ability to survive in a world that was foreign to him. The thought unsettled him, yet also filled him with a cautious respect. Here was a woman who saw him, truly saw him, in a way no one else had. Gradually, James allowed himself to observe her more closely. He noticed the way she moved with precision, the grace in her posture, the quiet power in her gaze. She was not merely commanding. She was thoughtful, strategic, and deeply aware of the world around her. And in that awareness, he saw a reflection of the values he had always admired: honor, courage, and the capacity to lead without cruelty. For the first time, he began to wonder if perhaps this declaration, frightening as it was, could be the start of something meaningful. Ayanna, sensing his shifting emotions, did not push him further. She allowed him space to process, to wrestle with the unfamiliar feelings stirring inside him. She knew that true respect and understanding could not be forced. It had to grow naturally, nurtured through time and shared experiences. Her choice was firm, but her patience was steady. She remained near, a quiet presence that neither demanded nor pressured, yet held an undeniable weight. As the night wore on, James found himself reflecting on his life before the canyon. The endless rides across open plains, the solitary campfires, the constant need to fend for himself, all of it seemed distant now, replaced by a strange sense of connection he had not anticipated. He realized that while he had always valued freedom, there was something in Ayanna's presence that made him consider another kind of strength, one rooted not in solitude, but in trust, partnership, and mutual respect. By the time the moon reached its highest point, James's thoughts had settled into a tentative calm. The initial shock and resistance had given way to curiosity, the anger to contemplation, the fear to cautious acceptance. He still did not fully understand what lay ahead, nor could he predict the path their lives would take. But he felt, for the first time since his capture, a faint sense of possibility, a recognition that this woman, fierce and resolute, might challenge him in ways that would ultimately make him stronger. Ayanna finally spoke again, her voice soft in the quiet night. "You will learn," she said. "We will both learn. This is not the end, James. It is only the beginning. Trust yourself, trust me. Time will show you the way." Her words, simple yet profound, carried a promise as much as a command. James looked at her, feeling a mixture of respect and apprehension. He did not know if he could ever fully embrace what she had proposed, but he realized that he could no longer view her simply as a captor. She had claimed a place in his life, whether he liked it or not, and he would have to navigate this new reality with care, courage, and awareness. The night drew to a close, and the canyon fell into a peaceful silence. Fires burned low, stars glittered in the sky, and the world seemed to hold its breath as if aware of the subtle, powerful shift that had taken place. James remained near the fire, awake and thoughtful, while Ayanna sat quietly beside him, a steady presence in the vastness of the night. Neither spoke further, but an unspoken understanding had begun to form between them, one built on respect, curiosity, and the recognition of each other's strength. As sleep eventually claimed him, James felt a strange sense of anticipation. He did not know what the coming days would bring, but he understood that his life had changed forever. The declaration of marriage, unexpected and bold, had set in motion a journey that neither he nor Ayanna could fully predict. Yet in the quiet of the canyon, beneath the watchful stars, he felt the faint stirrings of a bond that might one day grow into trust, partnership, and perhaps even something deeper. And so, the night ended not with fear or resistance, but with reflection, understanding, and the beginning of a story that would challenge both of them, shaping their hearts, their minds, and the path they would walk together in the days to come. The morning after the night of Ayanna's declaration was quiet, with the sun rising slowly over the canyon and painting the rocky cliffs in warm shades of orange and gold. James woke with a lingering sense of tension and anticipation. The words she had spoken, "You will be my husband," still echoed in his mind. Yet the fear and shock that had gripped him the night before were beginning to soften, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He knew that whatever came next, he had to adapt, to understand, and to find a way to navigate this unfamiliar life. Iana was already awake when James emerged from his resting place. She moved with her usual calm grace, tending to the morning routines of the tribe without a word. James watched her, noticing small details he had not before, the way she adjusted the children as they learned, the precision with which she handled the tools and food, and the careful attention she gave to each person's needs. He realized that she was not only strong and commanding, but also deeply thoughtful. Everything she did had purpose, and everything she did seemed to be guided by care for those around her. "You will help today," she said simply when she noticed him watching. Her tone was firm, but there was no harshness. James nodded, accepting the instruction. He had learned by now that obedience was not submission. It was a way to earn respect and perhaps a place in the life of the tribe. He joined her and the other members as they prepared for the day's work. At first, the tasks seemed simple: gathering firewood, tending to the animals, and helping with food preparation. But James quickly realized that each action required attention, patience, and skill. Iana guided him carefully, showing him the correct ways to handle the animals, the safest ways to gather resources, and the importance of observing the environment. "Notice everything," she instructed. "The land, the wind, the signs. They tell you more than words." James followed her instructions closely, gradually learning to see the world through her eyes. The canyon, which had once seemed just a rugged, unforgiving landscape, now revealed itself to him as a place full of subtle clues and hidden opportunities. As the day progressed, James began to understand the rhythm of life within the tribe. He watched how the adults worked together, supporting each other without needing constant direction. He noticed how the children learned not just through instruction, but by observing and imitating the actions of their elders. And he began to realize that the tribe's strength lay not only in individual skill, but in cooperation, trust, and shared responsibility. This understanding was new to him, and it changed the way he approached every task. By midday, Iana decided it was time for James to learn more advanced skills. She led him to the edge of the canyon where the land sloped into a series of rolling hills and dense brush. "Hunt," she said, her voice calm but commanding. James felt the familiar surge of anxiety. Hunting had been difficult before, but now he faced the challenge not only of survival, but also of proving himself to the woman who had chosen him for her life. He nodded, mounting his horse and following her closely, trying to absorb every movement, every gesture, every signal. They moved quietly through the hills, tracking small signs, broken branches, footprints, the subtle disturbance of grass and earth. Iana's skill amazed him. She moved like part of the landscape itself, noticing details he would have missed, predicting movements before they happened. James tried to imitate her, focusing on being patient, observant, and precise. When they finally spotted a small herd of deer, he felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was his chance to contribute, to show that he was learning, and to earn a measure of trust. The hunt required patience and cooperation. James had to trust Iana's directions and control his own impulses. When the moment came to make his shot, his hands trembled slightly, but he managed to succeed. Iana nodded approvingly, her eyes reflecting a quiet pride. "Good," she said. "You learn quickly when you listen." The words were simple, but for James, they carried a weight of recognition he had never received before. It was the first time he felt that he could be more than a captive, that he could belong, even if only gradually, to this world she ruled with such calm authority. Returning to the camp, James felt a growing sense of connection, not just to Iana, but to the tribe as a whole. He began to notice how people treated each other with respect and care, how tasks were shared without complaint, and how leadership was earned through skill and wisdom, not just authority. He saw children helping elders, men and women supporting each other, and a community that functioned as a single, living entity. The contrast with his former life was striking. Freedom had once been about doing what he wanted when he wanted. Now he realized true strength and fulfillment could also come from being part of something larger than oneself. Over the next several days, James continued to learn, to observe, and to practice. He made mistakes, of course, dropping tools, misjudging distances, missing subtle signs. But Ayanna never scolded him. Instead, she corrected him patiently, guiding him with a firm but gentle hand. Slowly, he began to feel a sense of competence and confidence that he had not known before. And as he learned, he also began to notice something more subtle, a growing respect and admiration for Ayanna herself. She was not only his teacher, but also a woman whose strength, wisdom, and courage inspired him. One afternoon, as they worked together to prepare the camp for a traveling hunter who would join them, James realized that he was beginning to trust Ayanna, not blindly, but in a way that allowed him to follow her guidance without fear or resentment. He saw that her decisions were thoughtful, fair, and often designed to teach rather than punish. For the first time, he felt that he was being shaped not by force, but by understanding, and in that realization he found a quiet sense of peace. Evenings became moments of reflection. After the day's work was done, James and Ayanna would sit near the fire, observing the tribe and the landscape. Sometimes they spoke, sharing stories, laughter, or lessons. Other times they remained silent, communicating through gestures, glances, or the simple act of being near each other. James began to notice the subtle ways she trusted him to make decisions, to act independently, and to care for those around him. Each small recognition of his efforts strengthened the bond between them, replacing fear with respect and resistance with cooperation. It was during one of these evenings that James first realized he was beginning to feel something unexpected, a connection not just to Ayanna, but to the life she represented. He saw that the world he had once known, the life of solitude and independence, had been only one part of existence. There was another kind of strength, one rooted in trust, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. And though he could not yet fully understand or name it, he sensed that this connection was growing, quietly, like the slow spreading of roots beneath the surface of the earth. Ayanna, for her part, observed these changes in James with quiet satisfaction. She had seen his courage, his stubbornness, and his ability to survive, and she knew that these qualities would serve him well in her world. But she also recognized that true belonging required more than skill. It required openness, trust, and willingness to learn. She did not push him, but she guided him, creating moments that challenged him, encouraged him, and allowed him to grow. In her eyes, he was becoming more than a captive. He was becoming a man who could walk beside her as an equal, even if the path to that equality was still long. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, James became more skilled, more confident, and more integrated into the life of the tribe. He learned the ways of the land, the rhythms of the community, and the wisdom in Ayanna's teachings. He began to understand that her authority was not a tool of oppression, but a framework for learning, growth, and mutual respect. And as he learned, he began to see her not just as a captor or a teacher, but as a partner in a world that neither of them could fully predict, but which they would navigate together. By the time the sun set on another day, James sat near the fire, watching the tribe move with quiet efficiency and grace. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just in the skills he had acquired, but in the understanding he had gained. He had begun to trust Ayanna, to respect her, and to recognize the life she had offered him, not as a prison but as a chance to grow, to learn, and perhaps to belong. The connection between them, once tentative and uncertain, was beginning to solidify, creating the foundation for something far greater than either had anticipated. In the quiet of the evening, as stars shimmered overhead, James allowed himself to acknowledge a small but undeniable truth. He no longer viewed himself solely as a captive. He was part of a community, part of a life that challenged him, nurtured him, and demanded his best. And most importantly, he was beginning to see Ayanna not only as a guide or authority, but as a woman of strength, wisdom, and depth. A woman he could respect, trust, and perhaps one day care for in ways he had never imagined. The morning sun rose gently over the canyon, casting golden light across the camp and filling the air with warmth. Birds chirped in the trees, and the soft rustle of leaves mingled with the distant murmur of a stream. James woke with a sense of calm he had not felt in years. The journey he had begun as a captive had transformed him, teaching him patience, humility, and the importance of trust. He stretched and looked toward the fire where Ayanna was already awake, tending to the morning routines of the tribe with her usual calm efficiency. Today felt different, though. James could sense it in the air, in the way the tribe moved with purpose, and in the subtle tension in the eyes of those around him. Something significant was about to happen, something that would mark the culmination of the days, weeks, and months he had spent learning, growing, and adapting. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, unsure of what the day would bring, but certain that he was ready to face it. Ayanna approached him quietly, her gaze steady and thoughtful. She gestured for him to follow, leading him to a small clearing where the tribe had gathered. Children sat near their parents, and elders observed with approving expressions. The men and women of the tribe moved with calm anticipation, aware that today would be a day of significance. James felt a lump form in his throat. He had been prepared for many challenges, but this moment, this ceremony, carried an emotional weight he had not expected. "You have learned well," Ayanna said, her voice calm but carrying authority. James nodded, feeling the sincerity in her words. He had worked hard, learned their ways, and earned a measure of trust and respect. Yet, even as he acknowledged this, he felt a flicker of fear. What did it truly mean to accept her declaration, to step fully into the life she had chosen for him? The questions crowded his mind, but he knew there was no turning back. Today, he would make a choice, not one forced upon him, but one he had come to understand and accept. The ceremony began simply but with profound significance. Ayanna led James to the center of the gathering, where a small fire burned, its flames dancing in the morning light. The elders nodded in approval, acknowledging the union that was about to take place. James looked around, noticing the faces of the tribe, expressions of respect, curiosity, and quiet encouragement. He felt a deep sense of belonging, realizing that he was no longer merely a visitor or a captive, but a part of this community, a part of their lives. Ayanna stood before him, her eyes meeting his with unwavering confidence. "James," she said, her voice steady, "you have learned our ways, you have earned our respect, and you have shown courage, patience, and understanding. Today you will join your life with mine, not as a captive, but as a partner." Her words carried clarity, strength, and a gentle invitation. James felt a mixture of emotions, pride, nervousness, gratitude, and a surprising warmth that spread through his chest. He stepped forward, meeting her gaze fully. The fear that had once gripped him was now tempered by understanding and respect. He realized that this was not a surrender, but an acceptance of a life that had challenged him, nurtured him, and allowed him to grow. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand. Ayanna's fingers met his, firm yet gentle, a gesture of connection, trust, and mutual recognition. In that touch, James felt the culmination of all he had learned, the patience, the skills, the understanding, and the bond that had formed between them. The elders began a simple ritual, speaking in their native language, accompanied by gestures and actions that symbolized unity, respect, and shared life. James watched carefully, following Ayanna's lead, understanding that each motion, each word, carried meaning far beyond what he could immediately comprehend. He felt the weight of the moment, the significance of the commitment he was making, and the honor of being accepted not just by Ayanna, but by the entire tribe. As the ritual progressed, James looked at Ayanna and saw the strength and depth of her character reflected in her expression. She was proud, calm, and unwavering, yet there was also a softness that few had the privilege to witness. He realized that this woman had chosen him not out of whim or desire for control, but because she recognized his courage, intelligence, and the integrity that matched her own. For the first time, he understood that her declaration had not been about possession, but about partnership. When the ceremony concluded, the tribe erupted in quiet celebration. Fires crackled, children laughed, and the elders smiled approvingly. James felt a profound sense of accomplishment and belonging. He had begun this journey as a captive, uncertain and fearful, yet he now stood as an accepted member of the tribe, equal in strength, skill, and purpose. The bond he shared with Ayanna was no longer uncertain. It was real, acknowledged, and respected. In the days that followed, James continued to live alongside Ayanna, but something fundamental had changed. Their interactions were no longer defined by authority and instruction alone, but by trust, respect, and an emerging partnership. He found himself anticipating her guidance not out of fear, but out of a desire to learn and grow. He sought to contribute, to protect, and to support, understanding that their lives were now intertwined in ways that required cooperation, understanding, and shared responsibility. Even the simplest tasks carried new meaning. Preparing food, tending the animals, maintaining the camp. All of these acts became opportunities to demonstrate skill, commitment, and care. And in each moment, James began to feel a sense of pride, not just in what he accomplished, but in the life he was building alongside Ayanna. He had learned that strength was not merely about survival or independence, but also about connection, trust, and the willingness to stand together in the face of challenges. Ayanna, for her part, observed these changes in James with quiet satisfaction. She had seen his courage, intelligence, and resilience, and she knew that these qualities would serve them both well in the days to come. Yet, she also recognized that true partnership required more than skill. It required understanding, respect, and emotional connection. She nurtured these aspects patiently, allowing their bond to deepen naturally, without force or expectation. In her eyes, James had become more than a captive. He had become a man she could respect, rely upon, and eventually love. As the sun set over the canyon, casting long shadows across the camp, James and Ayanna sat together near the fire. The warmth of the flames mirrored the quiet satisfaction in their hearts. James reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a lone cowboy riding through the canyons, captured and uncertain, to a man who had found belonging, purpose, and connection. He realized that life had a way of guiding people toward challenges that, though frightening at first, could ultimately reveal their true strength and potential. Ayanna spoke softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "We will face many challenges ahead," she said, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "But together we are stronger. Trust, courage, and respect will guide us." James nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He knew that life in the canyon would not always be easy, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. He had Ayanna, the tribe, and a shared purpose that gave him strength, direction, and hope. In the weeks and months that followed, James continued to grow, not only in skill and knowledge, but also in character and understanding. He embraced his role within the tribe, learning, teaching, and contributing in ways that earned the respect of all. His bond with Ayanna deepened, evolving from mutual respect to trust, and eventually to a quiet, enduring affection. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, and each day strengthened the connection they shared. Over time, James realized that the life he had once sought, the freedom of endless plains and solitary journeys, had been only one form of existence. True fulfillment, he discovered, lay in shared experiences, mutual respect, and a partnership built on trust, understanding, and love. And as he looked at Ayanna, standing beside him with quiet strength and unwavering confidence. He knew that this was the life he had been unknowingly searching for all along. In the quiet moments as they sat together by the fire, James allowed himself to feel gratitude, not just for survival, but for the unexpected journey that had brought him to Ayana, to the tribe, and to a life richer than he could have imagined. He understood that this union was more than a tradition or a declaration. It was the beginning of a shared story, one built on courage, respect, and the willingness to face the unknown together. The canyon, with its rugged cliffs, flowing streams, and open skies, had become more than a place of survival. It had become a home, a source of lessons, and a testament to the strength of human connection. And at the center of it all, James and Ayana stood together, partners in life, bonded by choice, trust, and a growing affection that promised to endure. As night fell and the stars appeared once more, James and Ayana sat side by side, watching the fires burn and the tribe move with quiet harmony. The world around them was alive, full of beauty, challenge, and possibility. And in that moment, James knew that he had found not only a place to belong, but also a partner who would walk beside him through whatever the future held. Together, they faced the unknown, bound by respect, courage, and the beginnings of love that had grown from the unlikeliest of beginnings.